Hello everyone, and welcome to the first of our 6-part coaching webinar series, Leading and Coaching Today. Time is a valuable commodity that can never be repurchased or reused, and we are honored that you've chosen to spend the next 45 minutes with us. My name is Bryn Meredith, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Blue Point Leadership Development. Before we get started today, I would like to go over a few housekeeping tips that might be helpful to those of you who are not familiar with this forum. You should be able to see a control panel on your screen. You can choose to expand or collapse this panel by using the white arrow in the orange box on the left-hand side. As we have such a large group on the call today, it is not possible to open up the floor for live questions. However, you should be able to see a question and answer section towards the bottom of the control panel, and this is where you can submit your questions or comments. We will do our best to answer your questions during the webinar, and if we cannot get to them all, then we will respond shortly afterwards. Please note that the webinar will be recorded, so if you do have to leave early or would like to share the content with someone else at a later stage, a copy of the recording will be available on our website. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce my good friend and presenter for today, Greg Thompson. President of Blue Point Leadership Development, Greg is a world-class facilitator, coach, author, and presenter with a passion for developing the greatness in individuals and organizations. He has been voted one of the top 100 thought leaders in North America for the past 3 years in a row, and is recognized by many as one of the leading experts in the world in the field of coaching and coach training. Greg, welcome, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Bryn. I am indeed delighted and honored to be with you all here today. It's simply a real privilege to be speaking to such a large group about such an important topic as coaching today. Just to let you know, the audience that you are part of, the community that you are part of here today, it's a very large group, and it is comprised of many senior human resource development, leadership development executives, leadership development specialists, a number of line managers, supervisors, executives from all kinds of organizations, and there's several professional coaches in the audience as well. So I did want to welcome you again, as Bryn did, and thank you for coming on and joining us here today. As we start out our conversation, I'd like to challenge you to answer a couple of questions, and answer these questions very much from a personal perspective. So if you would, just kind of sit back and consider a couple of questions before we launch into this conversation around coaching. And the first one is this. As you look at your own career, regardless of where you are at, whether or not you're just starting out, mid-career, or towards the end of your career, is your best work ahead of you or behind you? Is your best work ahead of you or behind you? Just sit with that question for a moment. Now I'd like you to think about your work today, like the job you have, the work you're doing. And I have another question for you. What did you do yesterday that is really worth talking about today? What did you do in your 8 hours, 10 hours, whatever you committed to your work? What did you do yesterday that is really worth talking about today? As you ask yourself and challenge yourself on these questions, what you probably experienced, what you likely experienced, was what we call a coaching moment. These are two very profound questions, and it's very difficult to ask these questions of yourself without some sense of indecision, intrigue maybe, challenge, mystery. Maybe there's an affirmation. Maybe this felt really good about your answer. Maybe this led to some more questions. Maybe it gave you pause for thought about what your day tomorrow might look like, or what a larger choice in your career might be. What you experienced is in a very brief moment of time, and in a medium that is very challenging, is a coaching moment. Now, the reason that I started our conversation off with this was to invite you to get a sense of what that felt like, because you did experience some form of coaching in that moment. You looked at things maybe a little bit differently. Maybe you were challenged. Maybe you were affirmed in some way. And I believe that will make a great backdrop for our discussion today by you thinking about how did you feel as you were responding to those questions. So here's our agenda. I'm going to take you through 5 modules as we have our conversation over about the next 45 minutes. Firstly, I'm going to start off and look at this idea of coaching today and briefly look at what's special about our organizations and why is coaching so impactful, particularly today. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the idea that coaches see the world and see people differently. They simply do, and talk a bit about this idea of a coaching perspective. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about the 3 timeless dimensions of coaching. Whether or not you take a specific coaching program, whether or not you're an executive, a leader, a professional coach, there's 3 timeless dimensions that all of us who set out to influence others need to confront and deal with. Fourth, I believe that coaching is really moving into a new era, and that there's opportunities for leaders at all levels to impact and influence people in a whole new way. And when we talk about this idea of a new breed, I'm going to talk a little bit about what are the characteristics of these wonderful men and women who really are making an impact in our organizations today. And lastly, I'd like to talk a little bit about the idea of creating a coaching culture. We call it Each One Coach One. And so I'll spend a little bit of time. Most of my comments here will be directed towards the most senior executives in organizations. But I believe it's helpful for all of us to look at this idea of creating a culture in which people are challenged to step up to their biggest game. People are encouraged to accelerate their performance and accelerate their careers. And talent is nurtured throughout the organization. Now, in total, the agenda today is really intended to set a foundation for the next 5 webinars. I'm honored to be leading all 6 of these webinars. So the conversation today is really about some foundational issues around this idea of coaching. So let's look, first of all, at why coach? I mean, why coach? Coaching is pretty hot right now. There's not a human resource development program in any significant organization that doesn't have a strong coaching element to it. And why? Simply because it works. Coaching is not a fad. You're not going to have somebody else coming on this line about a year from now or 2 years from now saying that coaching is past. Now we're moving on to something else. The reason being, at its very core, when somebody sits down with you and has a private conversation that helps you see your work, yourself, and your career through fresh eyes, and this person is really committed to your success, things happen. We change. We grow, we learn, we develop. Coaching is simply that powerful. We like to show this image. It's a painting called The Procession in a lot of our workshops at Blue Point. We use this as a metaphor for organizations today. Rather than using lines and boxes and arrows and the like, what we try to describe to leaders is really using this painting as a metaphor for the challenge they have to coach and to lead organizations today. So when you think of your own organization, how might this painting be a metaphor for organization life today? So look at this organization. Look at this the painting. Look at this as a metaphor. Look at the chaos. Look at the energy. Look at the sense of alignment, but also the sense of misalignment. Look at the people who are highly engaged and those who are not. Look at the extraordinary diversity. Leaders today step up to this every morning. This is what they inherit as leaders. And the one thing that we have learned is that coaching has impact throughout the organization, not just on individual performers. Organizations that are well led are highly aligned. People are heavily engaged, very creative, very innovative. And coaching is one of the most powerful interventions, one of the most powerful processes to have this challenging, chaotic, colorful, energetic thing we call an organization become more productive, more engaged, more aligned, more committed. If you look at it on an individual level, I've had the opportunity now of asking thousands and thousands of wonderful men and women, mostly leaders in our organizations, to look back in their own career at a time they made a major shift. They changed their attitude, a major shift in performance. The direction of their career changed in some way. They started to perform at a whole new level. Probably 90% of the time, when the person is very candid with me and with themselves, they will refer to one person who was at that crossroads for them, that one coach-like person that helped them make that significant shift. And it almost always was somebody that didn't have coach on their business card, may not even have leader, manager, executive on their business card. It was somebody who took a particular interest in them. I love this, quote from Marshall Falk. The most powerful weapon on earth is the human soul on fire. Now, I recognize that sounds a little artistic and maybe a little humanist for a conversation about organizations and business and coaching. But I'd like you to think about your own team, whatever team that you're on today. If every person on that team was absolutely on fire, what could you do? What could you do? The amazing things that we can do in our teams when every person in that team is on fire. So then I come back to another question. This is a big question for all of us who consider ourselves coaches. Now, some of it have it on our business cards. Some of us are leaders who try to be very coach-like in what we do. Some of us are simply emerging leaders who are striving to be more coach-like in their day-to-day work with their team. There's one challenging, haunting, overriding question for all of us. This is a question that confronts me as the president of Blue Point Leadership Development and confronts a receptionist who is trying to make an impact on his or her team in his or her organization. And here's that question. Do others attribute their high performance and career acceleration to you? Do you really make a difference? So I would encourage you to think about wherever you are today, whatever you are, however you're located in your organization, whether or not you're an internal or an external, if you are truly honest with yourself. And if I came into your organization and I interviewed all the folks around you, the people you touch every day, would they attribute their high performance and career acceleration to you? Because this is the only measure of the coach. There is no other measure. And we don't get to answer this. We don't get to tell whether or not we do not get to measure whether or not we are a great coach. Our impact as a coach is written on the lives, careers, and jobs of other people. I'd like to start out with this idea of the coaching perspective. This is foundational for all coaching. All coaching starts with this. It really starts with this idea about how we look at other people. It is not some nifty 5, 6, 7-step process. There's lots of good coaching programs that are linear and step-by-step, and we'll talk a little bit about this later. But all coaching starts with one thing. When you look at other people, what do you see? When you look at other people, what do you see? I'm going to take you through a very brief exercise here, just to challenge you to refresh your thinking about your own perspective of other people. What I'm going to do, I'm going to show you a series of photographs. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, as you look at each person, grab yourself a piece of paper somewhere, wherever you are, and I'd like you to jot down a couple of words about that person. Just take a guess. What job do you think they have? What's their personality like? When you look at this person, what's your immediate reaction to the person? Would this be a possible friend of yours? Is this person a CEO of some organization? Are they the receptionist of the organization? Is the person unemployed, non-employed? Would this person look to be very coach-like to you? So as I show you these photographs, just pause, be brutally honest with yourself, and just jot down a couple of notes as in terms of your impression of this person. So who is this gentleman? What does he do? What's he like? What's his personality? So who is this young lady? What's her job? Would she be a friend of yours? Would she fit into your organization? What's her personality? Who is this? Who does she remind you of? What do you think her strengths and gifts are? If you met her on the street, how would she interact with you? Would she be a good coach? This gentleman, who is he? What does he do? What is his potential? Who is he? What has he done so far? What's his job? How would you describe his character? This gentleman, CEO of your organization, what's your honest first reaction to him? What would your assumptions be about his potential if you were his coach? Now, as you look back at that exercise that we just went through, I would ask you to make a determination as to what judgments did you make. Many of us, when you ask somebody if they're judgmental, our first reaction is, no, I'm not judgmental. Other people are judgmental. I'm not judgmental. I'm here to tell you, being judgmental is part of the human condition. It would be very unusual for you to look at all of those images of all of those people and not make judgments. We all come at our interpersonal interactions with a set of values, a set of biases, a set of perspectives. We all do. It is part of the human condition. What judgments do you make? So my guess is if you're really honest with yourself, you made specific judgments about every person in that series of images. So I'm going to ask you now to ask yourselves some very potent and profound questions that are fundamental to this idea of a coaching perspective. Generally speaking, when you look at a group of people, when you walk into the room, when you come to work, when you interact with people you know well or people that you've just met, when you see people, what do you see? Do you see them as pawns on a chessboard? Do you see them as things you need to move around, things you need to make strategic decisions about, things that you need to change, things that you need to move? Do you see them as problems to be solved? I will tell you, the engineer in me is always fighting this. When I engage people, I often see them as problems to be solved. Do you share that with me? We use the word often in organizations about human resources. When you look at people, it's your first reaction. This is a resource to be used. Resource to be used by me, resource to be used by the organization, a resource to be used by our team. Or is there a different way of looking at people? When you see people, can you see them as a reservoir of unused talent? Is your immediate reaction say, man, there's got to be more talent there. What can I do to help release that talent? Do you honestly see others as being fully capable and resourceful? Fully capable of living their own lives, fully capable of doing their work, fully capable and resourceful of solving their own problems? When you look at people, do you see them as valuable potential partners? Is your first reaction that this person is an equal, regardless of their position within the organization, and could be a valuable personal partner for me? Here is the haunting statement for all of us, is that they know. We're very transparent. People we interact with on a day-to-day basis know the regard in which we hold them. When we see them as problems to be solved, when we see them as resources to be extracted, if we see them as pawns on our chessboard, that is very difficult to coach from that perspective. In the coaching perspective, we see people at their very best. So when you think about this, if what I say is true, that we all naturally have judging natures, judging characteristics, we take judging perspectives, which is contrary to coaching perspective. When we are judging, people will not willingly, readily accept coaching from us. I would suggest that having the coaching perspective is not natural for all of us. It, quite frankly, is probably not natural for any of us. That the coaching perspective, choosing to see people at their very best, is fundamental to all coaching. We come to coaching with our own biases, perspectives, and judgment. Quite frankly, I've never met a coach who's been devoid of these. Every coach I've ever met, even the great coaches, have their own biases, perspectives, and judgment. what they do, what these wonderful men and women do, is they choose to ignore them. They choose to see people at their very best. They choose to see people as a reservoir of untapped talent. It all starts there. So my question to you is, when you look at other people, what do you see? When you look at other people, what do you see? So what does great coaching look like? There's a number of wonderful coaching programs that are available in the human resource development sphere these days. Here is how all great coaching starts. And here's, again, the haunting question for us. If it was illegal to be a great coach, would there be enough evidence to convict you? So if I walked into your organization and I didn't look at you, I looked around your organization, what would I be looking for? Here's what I believe are some of the things that I would look for. Are the people deeply committed? Is there a sense of creativity? Are people growing and developing? Are they very productive? Are people learning as they are working? Do people have a strong sense of personal accountability? Now, the reason I shared this list with you is to be thinking for yourself, would this be a measure of your team? Would this be a measure of what's going on in your team? What I find is very interesting, I have the great privilege of looking inside dozens of organizations every year, dozens of organizations. And when I see this, when I see people who are learning, growing, creative, accountable, deeply committed to the team or the organization, there's always a great coach somewhere. I can always find somebody in the background. Maybe it's a supervisor. Maybe it's one of the team members. Maybe it's a mentor. Maybe it's a senior executive. Somewhere there's a great coach. There's always a great coach. So the challenging question for all of us on this call is that list for you? Does that describe the people that you touch every day? The arm's length leadership, the people primarily on your team. Maybe it's people that you work with. Maybe it's your coworkers. So when we look at the idea of great coaching and the process, the engineer in me really wants to have something that is predictable, something that is step-by-step, something that is sequential. And here is what most standard coaching processes look like. And many of you on this call would probably use such processes, and I would affirm that your continued use of them with a caveat, and I'm going to share that here shortly. First thing we tend to do is establish some kind of a relationship. We start to identify the problems and the issues. We generate possibilities. We weigh alternatives, consider options, make a decision, commit to some kind of action. This is generally the core of most standardized step-by-step coaching processes. Great coaching, unfortunately, almost never follows this. Almost never does. Now, this is a good set of coaching steps to make sure a coach is thinking about the various ways you can serve the person that you are coaching, but this almost never happens. I would, if you disagree with this point, I would challenge you to look back in your own career and look at those great coaching moments that you have benefited from, the great coaches in your life. My guess is that whatever happened in that moment didn't follow these specific steps, but was the most potent thing that you could hear in that moment. Here is where we all are at. We are all stuck to some degree. We're all stuck to some degree. We have to be stuck. And there's nothing wrong with being stuck, it just is. And the reason that we are stuck is that all of us knew less a year ago, 2 years ago. All of us performed at a lower level, primarily a year ago, 10 years ago. We work hard to perform at the level we are today. And to stay at this level, we need to get ourselves stuck. We need to create habits and assumptions and beliefs and practices and priorities and even relationships. We need to put these in place to keep us at this new level. Unfortunately, many times these are the things that prevent us from moving on. These are the things that stop us from moving on to that next chapter of leadership, that next chapter of performance, that next chapter as a professional, that next chapter as an individual contributor, whatever that might be. And so if we look at this, the people that we are coaching, these wonderful, even high performers, are stuck to some degree. If you look at what we have then as coaches, coaching is different than any other process because it is not temporal. And by that I mean it's not time-bound. Most things we work on are projects. People are not projects. Even though you may have a coaching relationship that extends over time, in coaching, we only have one thing. We have the now. As a coach, when I'm working with my client, the only thing I have is the next moment ahead of me. And I need to make one decision and one decision only. In this next moment, how can I serve the person being coached? In this next moment, how can I serve that person? In Bluepoint, we call the person being coached the talent. So just so you can recognize the term that's on the screen here. What can you do in this next moment to serve the talent? In this moment, because that's all we have as a coach, is that next moment. Is it some feedback? Maybe it's a question. Maybe it's a penetrating question, a question that challenges. Maybe it's an affirmation. Maybe we simply need to affirm this person in some way. Maybe it's a constructive confrontation. Maybe they need to hear something from us that they have not heard from anybody else. Maybe there's an insight. Maybe there's a particular perspective that they would find valuable. Maybe it is nothing at all. And for those of you who are very extroverted like me, you would probably find this very challenging, to simply sit in silence with another person, making the choice that that's the very best thing you could do for the person in that moment. So this is what the great coaching looks like. And so the great coaches have worked really hard to be able to make that decision. What is, in that moment, what is the most potent, powerful thing I can do for the person that I am coaching? Let me share, if I could, 3 timeless coaching dimensions. And these are the things that are present with all great coaching. All great coaching programs are based on 3 things. Number 1, it's about character. It's about being distinct in your organization. And quite frankly, and unfortunately, it is remarkably easy to be that distinct today. It is remarkably easy to be seen as a man or woman of character, to be seen as somebody who really values others, to be seen as somebody whose yes means yes and their no means no, that they truly are as good as their word. I would encourage you to look at this idea of character as something that we build every day. It's not something we achieve. It's one of the hardest things for me to learn as a young manager was that you never get there. Character is a path. It's a path that the great leaders, great coaches choose every day. They choose to step up every day onto a path that is going to be littered with landmines and opportunities for them to step off that path. And so when you look at somebody and you say that person has character, they didn't just make that decision 20 years ago. They made that decision this morning. Next is this idea of connection. Coaching is not a friendship. It's not that kind of a relationship. Now, you can be friends with the people that you do coach, but a friendship is a relationship of equals, and coaching is not. Coaching is all about the other person. A great coach is what we call an ardent advocate. They're a CAO. They're your chief ardent advocate. They are the person that will do whatever they need to do in that moment to help you perform at your very best, to help you step up to a new game, to help you achieve the career goals that you're looking for. And thirdly, it's about the conversation. The great coaches are interpersonally courageous. If you're like me, you go through the course of a day making choices about the kind of conversations you're going to have with people. Now, I'm not advocating that every conversation you have needs to bring people to tears. It needs to be about the deepest aspirations and values, and you need to have an emotionally bloodletting conversation everywhere you go. However, think about the people in your organization where everything is superficial. They just touch down lightly. Every conversation is veneer thin. It's all humorous or it's all light. We do not attribute the qualities of coach to these men and women. We attribute the qualities of coach to men and women who are interpersonally courageous. They will talk about things other people will not. They will make fresh tracks in that conversation. They'll talk about disappointments. They'll talk about aspirations. They'll talk about core values. They will stop and have a conversation with you about some of the most important things at play in your work, in your career, and in your life. In the course of my work, I have this wonderful opportunity to look inside dozens of organizations every year, as I've mentioned. And in the course of this, I have met so many wonderful men and women who I call a new breed. These are the men and women who are leading in a brand new way. These are the coach-like men and women who really are making an impact on the people around them in their organizations. And through the course of the work and the research that I've done, I found really there's 4 things that always stand out. And these are 4 things that I've mentioned so far, but I want to kind of summarize them in the course of these next 4 slides. First and foremost, they have a different perspective. They do not see people as problems to be fixed, but they have the perspective. Whatever team they work on, whatever room they walk into, whatever customer they meet, that their perspective is that anybody else is creative, resourceful, and full of potential. And as I mentioned before, we're very transparent, and people know this. So I'd like you to think about this. Somebody walks into the room, and they immediately, when they look at you, you know they are seeing a creative being. You know that they see you as valuable and being very resourceful and full of potential. You will immediately ascribe the quality of coach to this person. We all do. Secondly, they've earned the right to coach. They have earned the right to coach because they consistently see the best in others. But they don't stop there. They confront others with that. They challenge people to see themselves at their very best. And lastly, they hold them accountable to be their very best. So think about this. How many people do you know? How many people do you work with that when they walk into the room, they immediately see the best in people in that room? They tell them about that. They confront them with that and hold them accountable to be that. This is the person that has formed that unique relationship with others. And fourthly, these are individuals who really can engage in what we call difficult, risky conversations. They will talk about things that others will not. And unfortunately, many of these things evoke emotion. So you can tell right away if you're willing to engage in difficult, risky conversations, because they almost always evoke some kind of emotion. And what we tend to do is we tend to be repelled by that emotion. We tend to move away from that. So if you find yourself doing that and you want to be a great coach, where there is emotion, there tends to be some fertile ground for coaching. Now, again, I don't believe that every coaching session has to be a gut-wrenching, emotional session. But it is very rare that we engage in very fertile conversation in coaching when some emotion is not present. So lastly, I'd like to speak just a little bit about this idea of creating a coaching culture in an organization. Organizations that are very coach-like and have this sense of talent development, bringing out the best in others, have some particular characteristics. I'm going to speak now primarily to senior executives, but this is important information for all of us to hear. So if you are a senior executive today, if you're leading a large organization, I'd like to encourage you to be thinking about 3 things that you can do to really be an executive leader as coach, to be an executive who creates a culture of coaching. First and foremost, it's about modeling coaching. I've never yet worked with a client organization where there was a strong culture of coaching when the most senior executive was not seen as being coach-like. It's one of these things you cannot just talk about, you have to do it. You have to be able to model coaching. You have to be a great coach yourself. Now, you may not engage in formal coaching processes, but it's about being coach-like in everything you do. It's about starting to be seen as an authentic, competent leader who's deeply committed to others. When the senior executive of an organization is deeply committed to the success of others, he or she is very transparent, and this sets a powerful signal for coaching. They also develop relationships with the people around them that are appreciative, that have constructive confrontation with them. They hold people around them to be personally accountable for their own career development. They have these conversations that focus on critical career and performance issues. So when the executive leader is modeling great coaching, this is the first step. Secondly, they expect coaching. So they expand coaching throughout their organizations. And how do they do that? So picture this. A senior executive has a team, maybe 7, maybe 10 people that reports to them. We often call this team the executive leadership team in most organizations. When the senior executive holds all of his or her direct reports accountable to be great coaches, this is the second step. It's about expanding coaching beyond the executive down into the organization. Now, one of the great ways of doing this is, first of all, holding each of these direct reports accountable to be a great coach. Maybe you want to mandate that they all take high-level, impactful coach training, but also that the performance and reward systems are skewed towards coaching. Here's how one of my clients does it. He's a senior executive, and what he does is he does not hold his direct reports accountable to be high performers. He holds them accountable to have high performers reporting to them on their team. That's the only thing he looks at, is the performance of the people that report to the people that report to him. And when you think of this, what this does is really encourage his direct reports to be personally involved in their performance. And they quickly recognize to help them perform at the highest level, they need to be coach-like. Thirdly is to simply expect coaching throughout the organization. At Blue Point, we believe that coaching is everybody's business. Everybody can coach everybody else. I had the great honor a couple of years ago of leading a weekend session. It's a coaching program for high school students. And I had about 15 high school students in a room for the day. And I invited about 10 senior executives, mostly CEOs of client organizations, to come and to work with us for the day. The purpose of this day was to help these young men and women develop coaching skills that they could use throughout their career. And we went through a variety of coaching experiences through the course of the day. What was phenomenal is at the end of the day, these 10 senior executives were the ones that said they benefited the most. They benefited the most from being coached by high school students. See, these high school students didn't know they shouldn't ask that question. They came at coaching with such a sense of innocence and commitment to the person they were coaching. They didn't care if the person was a consultant, a senior executive, or a classmate. What I learned from that experience was that anybody can coach anybody. Anybody. We have a program in Blue Point called Each One Coach One. And through this program, we really encourage everybody in the organization to find somebody who they can coach. And then everybody in the organization be coached by one other person in the organization. And this idea of expecting coaching throughout the organization is the third element of creating that coaching culture. I want to thank you for spending this time with me and sharing this introduction to our 6-part webinar series. Bryn's going to describe here shortly the following sessions, the sessions that are upcoming, and I would invite you to come back and join me on the next conversations. On the slide that you have here is my email address and my telephone number. I leave that up there because I would be delighted to hear from anybody. If you have a question on coaching, you have a comment, you want to have a conversation, I love to talk about leadership. I love to talk about coaching. Please contact me at any time. I'd be honored to take your call. I'd be even more privileged to have a conversation with you around this idea of coaching.